time for us to go into thought leaders, storytellers, and griots.
Thought leaders, storytellers, and griots, sharing personal highlights on stories of the week.
Well, we're all waiting in anticipation for the cabinet of the GNU. Plenty taking place over the last 24 hours and many diversions, as I say, much misinformation and disinformation, but also a challenge as we move towards a collaboration and not, as some of you might have said in the past, a collision. So we thought we'd speak to two people that have been doing very interesting work around facilitating conflict and facilitating warring parties, one could say, in this case not warring physically, but maybe warring socially, bringing them closer together. So Adam Kahane is a conflict mediator and a facilitator, and he is part of an organization called Reos. Reos are partners, etc., in transformative work and collaboration. He also wrote a book called Collaborating with the Enemy and how to work with people you don't agree with or like or trust. And part of that book was about talking about his work that he had engaged in Colombia and worked on with the fighters, the FARC. And so we thought we'd get hold of him and just find out about the kind of work that he had done and really how he had thought about that kind of facilitation with regards to collaboration. As I started the interview with him a few days ago, I asked him whether his name was Kahane or Kahane, and this was his response.
My name's pronounced Kahane. A very funny story, because it's spelled exactly the same as a common Sutu name, Kahane. I was to at Turfloop, University of the North, running a workshop, waiting for it to start. We're sitting in a circle. This Sutu-speaking woman leans over to me, says, "When is this guy Kahane going to get here? These Africans, they're always late." So anyway, I've had a lot of fun experiences with my name in South Africa. And the second thing, which is important for context, I've spent part of every year in South Africa for 30 years. I don't know everything about everything, but it's not a foreign country to me. My wife is South African. I have 4 South African children, 10 South African grandchildren, so I have a home there. So I learned what I know in South Africa, or at least that's the base of what I know. And I have been thinking a lot about it as I've watched the election results. I have been thinking about it. I think that South Africans have sort of treating quite an ordinary situation as extraordinary just because it hasn't happened for a long time in South Africa.
Take that further, please.
Well, the notion that one party will not have a majority, especially in a proportional representation system, is not unusual at all. Even Canada, which has first past the post, is presently in a coalition government, with the Liberal Party being supported by the New Democratic Party, and dependent on them to win votes or to stay in power. And of course, other countries with proportional representation, the ones I know best are the Netherlands and Belgium, do this every time and go for months, if not years, before they can agree a coalition agreement. So, yes, it's the first time in South Africa since the first government of national unity, but it's not an extraordinary situation, especially in countries that elect governments by proportional representation.
So, Adam, if you have to look at the experience that you've had in having seen it over the years, what would you say some of the things are that need to be thought about? Because I think one can go into a coalition if you are ideologically similar. What about when you go into a coalition where your ideologies sit at two opposite ends of the spectrum?
Well, I think already this betrays the misunderstanding, if I can put it that way. So in two respects. Firstly, collaboration is always across difference. If I could do what I wanted to do just with me and my people, then I wouldn't have to collaborate with anybody.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's possible. Sometimes governments can be formed of one of one party, and that has been the case in South Africa. But often, or actually most of the time, there are differences either within a party or across parties. And so we have to work with people who we don't agree with on everything, or we don't agree with on many things, or maybe we don't like or trust. So the idea that collaborating across difference is something unusual, I think, is the first misunderstanding. The second misunderstanding, and this is something I have been thinking about a lot the last few days, is people have a tendency to always go to the extreme, or to very frequently go to the extreme. I wrote a book called Collaborating with the Enemy, which is a bit of a tongue-in-cheek title. That sometimes we do have enemies, but most of the time we have people who are different from us, or opponents, and we have to find a way to work with them. When I was working on that book, whenever I would post a question about it or an update about it on social media, I have a cousin by marriage, I should say, who would always say, well, surely you're not suggesting collaborating with Hitler. So this immediate move to, they're the opposite of us, those people, we could never work with them. So I was thinking that this tendency to polarize, to state things in black and white, is really unhelpful, because most of the time, maybe not all of the time, but most of the time we're talking about shades of gray, not black and white. And it's this tendency to move from, they're different from me, I don't agree with them, they're my opponent, they're my enemy, they're actually the devil, they're not even human. That spectrum, which we see in many places, I think is extraordinarily dangerous.
You know, Adam, you talk about the book Collaborating with the Enemy. But also there is that idea that if we go into a collaboration, it needs to be an harmonious thing, which is not the case at all. That in fact, there's another way of going in, and that's that you all go in yelling and shouting and still come out at the other end relatively fine and all good.
Yeah, so one of the reasons the word collaboration is interesting to me is that it has two meanings, if you look in the dictionary. The first meaning is simply to work together with others. Doesn't say harmoniously, but to work together with others. In that sense, it's a synonym for cooperate or work together. But there's another meaning, which is very common in English and French, which is to be a collaborator. A word specifically associated with, well, maybe it has South African resonances, but it was used in France. A collaborator was somebody, it was the worst possible thing, sleeping with the enemy, literally. And so this idea, so I think this is important to remember, because the notion of collaborating has contained within it a tension, which is, on the one hand, I think I need to work with these people in order to do what I'm trying to do, in this case, in order to govern, to form a government, to get stuff done. So it's a practical thing. Some people just love to collaborate with everybody, but not very many people are like that. Most people collaborate because they need to do what they're trying to do. And at the same time, we always worry, am I going to have to betray that which I hold most dear through working with those people? So that tension is contained within it. And the idea that collaboration should be or needs to be or harmonious with people we agree, a very basic misunderstanding. I'll give you an example where I got this most strongly. After I first started working in South Africa, the other country I did a lot of work was in Colombia, which at the time was in the middle of a very long and very brutal civil war. And this particular project was started by a young out-of-work politician named Juan Manuel Santos. In fact, he was advised to start this project by Nelson Mandela, who was his hero. And so this project started in 1996 and brought together all of the actors in the Colombian conflict, including all of the armed actors, including cabinet ministers, military generals, the representatives of the two left-wing guerrilla movements, the ELN and the FARC, and NGOs and church people and so-called self-defense forces, etc. An extraordinary project. 20 years later, in 2016, Santos was now president of Colombia and was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for having made a peace treaty with the largest of the guerrilla armies, the FARC. And on the day he was awarded the prize, he put out a statement that said, you know, one of the most important steps on the road to peace was this Destiny Colombia project. So I was very happy, but I didn't understand why he said that. So many bigger things had happened over the 20 years. He'd been Minister of Defense. He tried to defeat the guerrillas militarily. There had been 5 years of negotiations in Havana, etc. So a few months later, I had the opportunity to ask him, why do you even remember these workshops, let alone mention them on the day you get the Nobel Peace Prize? And he had a very interesting answer. He said, the reason I so often mention Destiny Colombia is that's the first time I realized that contrary to all of my political and cultural and family upbringing, it is possible to work with people you do not agree with and will never agree with. And this is an extraordinary statement. We sort of imagine, well, you know, we'll get together with these other people and we'll find it was all a terrible misunderstanding. We'll have a drink and a laugh and we'll realize actually we agree. And sometimes that happens. But for me, Santos is pointing to a much more common case, which is we're going to find we don't agree, we'll never agree, and we still have to we have things we need to do together. And the example he gave was very interesting, was him and Hugo Chavez, who was the president of Venezuela, the neighboring country. It was obvious when they met they would never agree. Chavez was a revolutionary socialist, and Santos was a neoliberal conservative, but they were presidents of neighboring countries, and they had a lot of things they needed to do together. So this, for me, was a very helpful formulation. And so the question isn't, are we going to agree on everything, or do we like or trust each other? But how are we going to get stuff done in spite of our differences and disagreements and mistrust?
Well, that's incredibly potent. Could you just repeat that last line again? How? The how are we going to? Let's remind ourselves as we move forward.
The question isn't about waiting to find partners with whom we agree with and like or trust. The question is how to work together and get stuff done with people that we don't agree with and maybe don't like or trust. And I always thought it was very interesting. The word used in English for these situations is coexistence. That's the word used in the peace field. It's a very dry word. You would never say, I'm coexisting with my spouse. But the word used in Spanish and French is cohabitation. And it's the same word used for a couple living together, which immediately evokes, well, I don't know about you, but my experience of living with my spouse, we agree on some things, we disagree on other things. A large part of it is how do we live together in spite of certain things that we will never agree on. So this, for me, is the interesting question. Through what means and processes can we cohabit in this place we live in?
I mean, the reality is you live with your wife, and as much as you may not agree with her, there are certain areas, for example, that you may not agree, but you still trust her implicitly. What happens if you are going into that particular process and the trust is not there?
Well, I think that's an important point. And all I would say about this is that trust is not a prerequisite for working together. It is a result of working together. And again, trust is not black and white. I trust you to show up for this call and to conduct a professional interview, but I've never met you before. If you said, would you give me your bank account details? I would say no. So again, this tendency to think that these things are black and white, we either trust each other or we don't, we either agree or we don't, we can either work together or we can't. For me, this is moving in the wrong direction, just not a helpful formulation. And also, I think there's another version of this or aspect of this that's important. We think about this, or we tend to focus on these grand aspects of getting stuff done. You know, the overall coalition agreement, the vision, the direction of the country, and that's important. But I think equally, or maybe more important, is all of the practical things that need to be done. And the Colombia work I referred to earlier was a grand question of war and peace, but these same processes for working together across difference, working together across sectors and stakeholders, is work we've done around the world in education and healthcare and nutrition and food and climate and sustainability and corruption. So again, let's take it down to the practical questions of how are we going to get stuff done on issue X or in sector Y, where we could do it all on our own, just with our friends and colleagues, but we can't. We have to work with strangers and opponents, people in not just in other political parties, but in other organizations, other sectors, people we probably don't entirely agree with or like or trust, but that's what's necessary. And in my experience, South Africans are as good at that as anybody in the world. In fact, most of what I know about collaborating cross-difference, which I've been working on for 30 years, literally all over the world, I first learned in South Africa. So let's not imagine that that first of all, it's about the whole thing or nothing, that it's about agreeing completely or not at all, that it's about trusting completely or not at all, and that it's some foreign idea which is more difficult or more extraordinary in South Africa than elsewhere. Of course, every place is the same and every place is different, but this idea of collaborating across difference is something that everybody all over the world is trying to figure out how to do. So let's not be scared of it. Let's just get on with it.
That's Adam Kahane. He's the director of Reos Partners, but he's also an author. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the books is called Collaborating with the Enemy. Certainly talking to the idea of where do you stretch and flex in terms of your coalition and your working with others.
Set in a gleaming new high-tech trauma center that deals with only the most serious cases, an emergency medical team must battle through the crucial first hour of care to save lives that hang in the balance. Each distinctive case is told with a thrilling intensity and nail-biting urgency as the team work on the very edge of the medically possible. This is a medical drama like no other. This is Critical. Mondays to Wednesdays at 9 p.m. on S3. Starts 11 June. Channel your best drama with BBC Primetime. Only on S3. Open up.
The Trinidor Ultimate Big Blue Sale is now on. Get amazing discounts on the best security South Africans trust. With over 50 franchises across the country, you can always find a security expert near you. So call 0861 Trinidor or visit trinidor.co.za today. Terms and conditions apply.
Come closer. Over here. Man, oh man, do I have something to tell you? Huh? You know what would happen if you weren't here? No SABC Sport, no The Masked Singer, no Espresso, no Afternoon Express, no Ready Steady Cook, no news and current affairs, no radio, no nothing. Just Dololo, silence. But you, my friend, you make it happen. Because you pay your home and business TV license, now we can deal or no deal. Skim Sam, Mubango, Hectic 99, and Fuetspura. Goze Guse, Jovijo. So please keep on keeping on and doing the right thing so we can make new memories and tell stories for the now generation. SABC TV licenses. Pay yours. Make a difference.
Set in a gleaming new high-tech trauma center that deals with only the most serious cases, an emergency medical team must battle through the crucial first hour of care to save lives that hang in the balance. Each distinctive case is told with a thrilling intensity and nail-biting urgency as the team work on the very edge of the medically possible. This is a medical drama like no other. This is Critical. Mondays to Wednesdays at 9 p.m. on S3. Starts 11 June. Channel your best drama with BBC Primetime. Only on S3. Open now.
Do you remember the cool times of Sports Buzz? Coming up on Sports Buzz used to be the go-to young people sports show in Mzansi, Africa. The multi-sport award-winning youth magazine show. A great platform that profiles young athletes and teams. The glory days of Sports Buzz are back in a newly revamped youth sports show with a wow vibe. Goats like us. Yeah, goats. Greatest of all time. Experience youth excellence in sports. Profiling of active athletes and teams. Latest news in the world of youth sports. The active voice of school sports and promoting a healthy lifestyle among the youth. Do not miss out on Goats Like Us. Your front row seat awaits you every Friday afternoon at 3 p.m. Live on SABC Sport on DTT Channel 4. Also available on SABC Plus and SABCSport.com. Hashtag Goats. Greatest of all time. Proudly brought to you by SABC Sport.
SAFM Youth Month Takeover. SAFM invites young people between the ages of 18 to 35 to take over the airwaves this Youth Month. All you have to do is send a WhatsApp voice note or text message to 061-410-4107 or email info@safm.co.za. Tell us which show you'd like to co-host and what the two compelling issues facing our 30 years of democracy are, and we could be calling you. Terms and conditions apply. Thought leaders, storytellers, and griots sharing personal highlights on Stories of the Week.
7:54, we have been talking about the concept of compromise, the concept of how we look at collaboration. Interesting take there from Adam Kahane, also looking at the idea of where the word collaborate comes from. So we thought we'd just close off on it with regards to that particular conversation, talking to Mahmood Sonday, who's the Managing Director of Reos Partners. And if we look at the GNU, what is the challenge going to be? And we've heard pretty much a very interesting take from Adam Kahane. Mahmood, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Michelle. Good morning to you and to the listeners.
So we are moving forward, and right up front I said, the last 48 hours, 72, whatever hours as well, have been quite anxiety-making. There's been a lot of pushback. It seems that people are not going into the flex space, but rather going into the solid space where there's very little flexibility. What do you think is going to be critical now as we move forward?
Yes, so it's interesting that you use the word flex and stretch, Michelle, because these are words that we typically use to describe the forms of collaboration that are unconventional, that are required when trying to work with diverse others, the kinds of people who we typically don't agree with or like or trust. And so I think it's going to take some time for leaders to adapt to this new normal. We see some signs of leaders sort of reaching out to each other in different ways, but then we also see a slide back into the more familiar ways of talking about each other and engaging with each other. This is a fundamental change, and we've seen some of the challenges And this experiment, in a sense, of trying to do coalitions more effectively at a national level warrants a culture change in the way that political parties and leaders engage with each other and are able to stretch more effectively.
You know, Mahmood, you talk about, excuse me, that it's a fundamental change and that we have seen coalitions in sort of a more provincial or even local government. The challenge, of course, is that, I can look at Johannesburg. You know, for many in Johannesburg, we feel that the coalition government has not been as successful as perhaps it should have been. So what are we going to have to think about on a national level if it's not even able to be comfortably worked and easily worked when we look at local governments?
So I think part of what we've found with the coalitions to date is that there was a lot of focus on the who. And by that I mean questions of who gets which job, who gets appointed as the mayor, who's the speaker, and so on. And this has been our experience with local government coalitions. And I've seen the result myself, having lived in Joburg for quite a long time. Dominant parties often are not willing to make compromises. Smaller parties often feel excluded and so forth. So when we think about making coalitions work at the national level, I think it's going to be important to pay attention to the how as well. The how of what we want to do together. And beyond that, the how of how to work together, how we want to relate to each other. There is a human dimension of collaborating across difference, and it does require increased maturity, self-awareness, and respect for others, including those who we fundamentally disagree with. So making coalitions work effectively at the national level will require, beyond creating better shared understanding of the issues, a willingness to really move into the gray spaces and not approach issues as binary black and white issues, but rather have the ability to speak about the specifics in detail and move away from absolute hard positions and get into the specifics and willing to have constructive dialogue about the areas that we disagree.
Mahmood, we unfortunately have to leave it there as we have to go to the news. But I like this thing about it's not necessarily only the who, it is the how. And certainly as citizens, we're all going, who's going to be in the cabinet? Who's going to be in the cabinet? But perhaps if we took a step back and said, okay, we know who's going to be in the cabinet. Now let's look at how they're going to make the difference that they make. I like that a lot. And I think as South Africans and as citizens of this country who want to see the country work, this must be the engagement as we move forward. Mahmood Sonday is the managing director of Reos Partners, looking at the concept of the how compromise and how we think about making sure that a government of national unity survives for the next 5 years and in fact even grows as well. It's 8 o'clock. It's time for the news.